Grudge match when we return.
Welcome to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to college prospect evaluation with a fantasy football focus. With your hosts, John Arrington, Aaron Wilcox, and Andy Starr. This podcast brings you actionable strategies and player-driven analysis for your Devy, C2C, and Dynasty leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into my first grudge match since 2021. Welcome into the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, John Arrington, joined normally by Aaron Wilcox and Andy Starr, but just Andy Starr tonight. And Andy decided that it was time. Aaron's away. Usually we play around, we have some fun, but Andy decided that he wanted to call me out on my Makai Lemon hatred, if you will, and that we were going to do a grudge match. Now, I had a podcast in the past called the Monocle Dynasty Podcast, and with that, as like right after I started the Devy Devotional and I started getting more into Devy and rookies and all that kind of stuff, created Beth, did all that, I started doing, I started having takes on these rookies, takes on these players. Well, I had some pretty different takes than other people, and so people decided, hey, I want to go on your podcast, and I want to fight you about it. I want to do a grudge match about these players. And at the time, they were highly coveted players, highly coveted rookies and recruits. And I did a grudge match about Malik Willis, which now sounds like a joke and sounds, silly, but at the time people thought that he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I also did a grudge match about Isaiah Spiller. Same thing. People were like, "Oh, he's the RB1 in the class." I was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, let's calm down." Well, guess what? Andy, he took some medicine. He decided, he went to the gym. I don't know. He got pumped up, watched some Rocky today. He decided it's time for grudge match number 3. I'm 2-0, baby. I know I might be a little rusty. Haven't fought since 2021, but 2-0, 100%. You really think you're going to take me down tonight? I don't know.
Well, you've already told me that you prepared way more than I did, so we'll see how that goes. But I think you called me out because you just out of nowhere said Makai Lemon is garbage. And this is a guy that I took with a 102 in our 2026 mock draft like 2.5, 3 weeks ago. So, I was like, this was news to me. Makai Lemon is all of a sudden garbage. I felt like that was some strong terminology. And then Aaron was like, you guys can, talk about this on the next pod. And I was like, maybe we will. And then I jokingly said, like, I didn't sleep at all last night because I stayed up going over the numbers and watching film, which of course I would never do. But I've got the Makai Lemon numbers. I've seen them. I've been paying attention all year. And I know that he is, he's not a slam dunk profile or anything like that, but he's comfortably like a tier 1 wide receiver prospect. And I don't think that should be controversial, but apparently it is. Now, to be fair, you said he's tier 2, which I still think is a little bit disingenuous, considering the season he's having and, what he's done even last year. So we'll duke it out. I don't know where you're going to go with it. I don't know if you're just going to just completely abandon every positive thought you've ever had about Makai Lemon, which would be fun. But if that's the case, then so be it. I'm here for all of it.
All right. So, well, first of all, I think this is one of those things where it's, like, obviously I tend to have a little fun with basically life. I enjoy life, and so I joke around and play around, but especially with my takes, like I tend to have fun with them. And so when people start getting crazy about a player, then I go, oh, he's garbage, or like, if they hate a player, that I like, then I'm like, oh, he's the best player that you've ever seen your entire life. And so I tend to go to those extremes. So, and I told you before we started where I actually have them ranked. Let's keep that a secret, at least until the end of the pod. We can discuss it then if you want, because it might ruin our argument here. But I do honestly think, all joking aside, and we're gonna have some fun tonight. But all joking aside, I do think that Makai Lemon is overrated, and I do think that like hopefully by the end of the night that you'll at least have an understanding of why I think that. Whether you agree with it or not, and whether the listeners agree with it or not. But more importantly, it's when you have, and we haven't mentioned a name yet, so I won't, I'll let you mention who you're comparing him to. But when you start comparing Lemon or other players to other players of high levels of just greatness, that's when it gets really difficult for me. And it's not just you. I've listened to multiple pods today. Obviously, a lot of people are already turning their eyes and attention to the 2026 class and big boards and everything else. And next thing you know, we have people already pushing Makai Lemon over Jordan Tyson. And obviously we always know, we've been here, done that for years now. We know people are always going to nitpick and try to get rid of the number one guy just because and everything else. But just the fact that it's already happening and everything is pissing me off. And so I'm like, I don't think they're in the same tier. And obviously, like I said, I'm going to do my best to convince you of the same thing before the end of the night. But I just, it's like, it's not just you. If it was just you, I don't even think we'd be having this conversation. But it's a lot of other people, and that's why we had to do a grudge match to make it work.
Yeah, you know, I think it all started from those conversations of people saying, well, let's push Makai Lemon to wide receiver one. And my kind of response to that was like, oh, that's like the Lucas of warm takes because, yes, Jordan Tyson is still my wide receiver one. But my thought was like, well, Makai Lemon is, I took him with the 102 in our mock draft. And I would say, worst case scenario, he's the 103 if we're going to do a mock draft today. So I'm like, the value of that opinion, the 101 versus the 103, if you're even able to make a trade like that from a 101 to the 103, what type of return are you planning on getting? Because it's not going to be a lot. So my whole thing was like the value of that opinion is just kind of a moot point because there's not really much value to be gained there by saying, oh, I'm going to be a spicy take guy and say Makai Lemon is the wide receiver one. I was like, okay, great, but that doesn't really change a lot when you're looking at the landscape as it stands right now.
Yeah, and I guess before we even get into everything else, I just want to at least put my opinion out there that like obviously everyone knows that Jeremiah Smith is the best wide receiver in college right now. That's not a shock to anyone. In Devy Beth, Jeremiah Smith is at a 0.598. Now that means absolutely nothing to you because you don't know what all goes into Devy Beth and what even a 0.598 means. But what I can tell you is it's substantially better than any other person in college football right now. Not necessarily substantially better than any other player ever in the history of the world or anything like that, but definitely better than any other player in college football right now. Cam Coleman actually, and I know you said you're kind of out on Coleman. But Coleman actually comes in at number two. He's at a 0.658. Once again, you don't necessarily know what that number is, but you're looking at a pretty large difference there. I wish we had the time to sit here and explain Devy Beth and how the grades work and all that kind of stuff. But the point of the story is that Jordan Tyson is a tier break from there, and then Makai Lemon is a tier break from Jordan Tyson. So we're really getting into, and we can call Jeremiah Smith a tier zero player. I'm fine with that. Like obviously, it's one of those players that are rare and much better than everyone else. So we can call him tier zero. But you're essentially saying Jordan Tyson's a tier one player, or at least Devy Beth is essentially saying Jordan Tyson's a tier one player, and then Makai Lemon is a tier drop from there. So he is now a tier two player, according to that. And obviously, like you're kind of nitpicking between like what the actual tiers are and all that kind of stuff. But I can tell you by looking at it that that's just how it is. And so this is not, there's no bias, there's no nothing. Debbie Beth doesn't do that. That's one of the great things that I love about the system that I've created, is that it takes any kind of bias or anything out of it. So it's just saying what they've done in college football, production wise, market share wise, PPR points per touch, all that kind of stuff. Jordan Tyson is a better player than Makai Lemon. And the thing that even stands out more is, generally speaking, if they were even on the same level, Makai Lemon would be ahead of Jordan Tyson because Tyson's a senior and Lemon is a junior, a true junior. So you would be thinking, the way that Debbie Beth is created, if you have players that are in like similar talent ranges and one's a junior and one's a senior, the junior's always going to be ahead of the senior. So that's even saying that Lemon's not even matching up talent wise or production wise or whatever you want to call it. Like Debbie Beth is not truly a production only model. There's a little bit of everything kind of mixed into it, so it's kind of difficult to truly explain it or name it. But just a long-winded way of saying that I don't think that they should be in the same. I don't even mind you taking them at 102, but I don't think they should be in the same breath as, oh yeah, you could just interchange 101. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, I hear what you're saying, but um, I think that there's a tier. I wouldn't call it a tier break, because Jordan Tyson, like as you said, is a senior. Part of that, his production break is obviously due to a massive injury he sustained. So we don't really know exactly what was going to happen his sophomore year, unfortunately, which is why he's still here. Because if you just say that year never happened and his junior season was his sophomore season and this is now his junior season, then yeah, he would, then we're talking about one of the tier zero type prospects. But I feel like Makai Lemon is more like a tier 1.5. I know that Debbie Beth probably doesn't have anything like that. And when it comes down to it, it is sort of pick value, especially when you're speaking in terms of dynasty. To say that the 101 and the 102, I'm just going to flip those two around, because I know what you're saying. With the tiers, you're saying tier ones is going to have a higher hit rate than your tier two players, but I feel like just in general in all draft classes, when you take a step back and look back 5 years in the future, most of those top 4 or 5 picks are going to have similar hit rates regardless of the draft, and the 101 isn't necessarily performing better than the 102 or the 103 in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's fair. I actually did that work when I first created Beth. Now I have not updated it in I don't know, 4 years, something like that. So these are obviously old numbers, but I want to say that when I originally created Beth and I was looking at the freshman hit rates, that a tier one wide receiver had a 93% chance of hitting, and that means a top 24 NFL season within their first 3 NFL seasons. That's what I was looking for at the time for the recruits. So I was looking for them to be a top 24 wide receiver and do it within their first 3 years. I had a 93% hit rate in the tier one players. I had a 78% hit rate in the tier two players. So it's still great hit rates, but obviously you start mixing in more of your like Terrace Marshalls and other players that kind of slip through where like they seem to have a lot of production and they might even be exciting and they might have great draft capital and things like that. But just when you kind of look at it, they never like obviously in hindsight it's really easy, but like even when you're sitting there looking at them, you're like, are you really a stud, or you did you just kind of get lucky or whatever it might be. And so once again, that's just showing like you're losing about a 20% hit rate or something around there when it's all said and done. So it's not to say that Lemon is terrible or that he's going to be garbage in the NFL or anything, but I think and we can go ahead and get into it. We've talked enough about this, but I think what I'm hoping to prove here is that he will have a tougher hill to climb to become a stud than like a player like Jordan Tyson or other studs in the NFL.
Yeah, And thankfully, we're not comparing him to Jordan Tyson right now because you and I are both in agreement that Jordan Tyson is the better prospect. But I'll just quickly say what I want to say about why I think Makai Lemon is the second best receiver in this class. And it's not by a wide margin, but I would say it's by a considerable margin for me, anyway. Um, I think the thing that is probably holding up a lot of people, maybe not a lot of people, but the thing that worries some people is I think he was a year 1-0. Correct me if I'm wrong. He only had 88 receiving yards as a true freshman. But again, I always look at yards per route run, and consistently improved every year. Even as a freshman, it was above 2. And then the last 2 seasons, it's been above 3. And right now we're at 3.64. I know your biggest concern is going to be A dot, or intended air yards, whatever you want to call it. Which of course, as a freshman, it's hard to really say because the sample size is so small. But that was six yards. Last year, when he had 750 yards receiving, whatever that was, 10.1. And this year he's sitting at 9.8. So we are below 10. His career, I think, is 9.7, something like that. And then yards per team pass attempt, another statistic that I pay attention to for wide receivers. Again, year 1-0, so that it was basically nothing his freshman season. Jumped up to 1.43 as a sophomore, and now we're sitting at 3.32. And anything above 3 for me is really, really good. So all those together, putting the A dot aside, he plays. I won't even say prime. It is primarily in the slot that he plays, but it's not like a Josh Downs where he's playing. Well, it is pretty close to a Josh Downs. I would say it's probably like an 80-20, maybe closer to a 75-25 split. But he can play out wide. And the name that I invoked, which, I've even admitted to you, I was like, I don't think he's the next Malik Neighbors. But I did invoke it with my tweet today because it's similar. Like
this is why we're here,
stats.
people. This is why we're here.
Listen, the stats, the numbers, when you talk about yards per route run, when you talk about yards per team pass attempt, when you talk about market share, the junior and sophomore seasons are on the same line. Now, granted, and this is why I don't want to say that he's the same as Malik Neighbors, because he's a little bit lower. Makai Lemon, that is lower than Malik Neighbors. I also want to say that Malik Neighbors played with Brian Thomas Jr., who is a wide receiver 1 in his own right. You can't really say that Makai Lemon is playing with another elite receiver. I know there's some Jacoby Lane fans out there. Jacoby Lane is not a day 2 pick at this point in time, so it's not the same level. I would also say that Malik Neighbors had better quarterback play. Jaden Maeva, for as good of a season he's having, he's not a very accurate passer down the field, especially in the intermediate routes. His completion percentage drops from like 80% from 9 yards and to the line of scrimmage to like 50% to anything beyond that. So that's where you see a little bit of a drop off. Now, that being said, Makai Lemon is still a good deep ball receiver. He's only had 9 catches on like 32 routes or something this season on routes beyond 20 yards, but he's performing well on those routes. Where the A dot drops is those 14 targets that he has behind the line of scrimmage, and that's a scheme thing. It's not like a Luther Burden thing where literally 50 targets in a season behind the line of scrimmage. And that was, Luther Burden's sophomore season. Same thing with Laviska Shenault. He had 50 targets behind the line of scrimmage his sophomore year. People got very excited. Now it seems like we're on the path to like 30 targets behind the line of scrimmage, which is still a lot. But these are schemed plays for him, and he's still performing on those deep routes. And I feel like if he had better quarterback play, he'd be doing better on the intermediary routes as well. But that's projection. I don't really like to do that, so I'll just leave that out of my argument. But all in all, like he's a yak monster, and I know we don't like to say stuff like that, but uh, he's doing it well. You've also got these big slot receivers like Treylon Burks. He's not the same type of player as a Treylon Burks. He's more in line with like the Josh Downs type of slot receiver, where he's getting the yards after the catch. But again, he's not that type of receiver either. He's kind of a tweener in body size. When you look at a guy like, Malik Neighbors would fit that prototype. But that's where I'm at with him right now. You're frozen right now on my screen, so hopefully you can still hear me. But that's pretty much all I have to say, and that's where I'm at. I think this is why I believe he's comfortably a tier 1 guy.
All right. Well, I did hear everything you said. Hopefully, the listeners can hear everything you're saying as well. I do see you kind of freezing up as well, so I don't know if we're just having connection issues. I know Riverside was kind of being weird tonight, so maybe it's something on their end. Who knows? But I do see you getting a little blurry, but hopefully it'll all work out. Hopefully everyone can hear us, because I do think this is important. I I think I've never actually looked up the year 1-0 theory before, but you said you thought that he was a year 1-0, so I just wanted to double check. I actually think that he broke the year 1-0 threshold not as a receiver, because you have to either get 10 receptions or 100 receiving yards, not as a rusher, because you have to either get 5 rushing attempts or 15 rushing yards or 1 rushing TD. He did not meet any of those thresholds. Not for scrimmage yards, because you can get a combination of the two, but for 5 punt or kick returns, you can break the year 1-0 theory, and he had 5 kick returns. So as a true freshman, so I think that according to their rules, he actually did break the year 1-0, albeit not necessarily as a wide receiver. Oh, you're muted. Oh, okay, you're still muted, and so I'm just going to continue on. So you went on for a little bit of a spiel there. You mentioned, oh, and we lost him. So hopefully he's going to come back here soon. He mentioned a lot there, though. Obviously, Malik Neighbors, when he brought up or invoked Malik Neighbors' name, as he said, that's when it got me. That's when it got my goat. Like, I was like, no, 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 no. We're not going to be comparing. It's bad enough that people are trying to push Makai Lemon over Jordan Tyson. Now you're telling me that one of my tier 0 wide receivers from last year, Makai Lemon's close to that. And I know obviously Andy's already kind of come down from that a little bit, and caveated it and everything. So hopefully people understand that he's not truly comping the players or anything like that. But he's trying to show that it's closer to Malik Neighbors, and he showed some of the campus2canton.com graphs and things, to show that he was somewhat close to Malik Neighbors. And I can't do it. So I came up with a bunch of reasons why he is not Malik Neighbors. But why don't we start by actually focusing on Makai Lemon here, and let's just say, obviously Andy already brought it up. I'm gonna focus on behind the line of scrimmage. I'm gonna focus on the short area targets. Andy's saying they wouldn't let him unmute though. Okay, but he should be good now, so hopefully that's better. We'll get him back here in a second. Okay, so yes, obviously you have to focus on those short area targets, the short A dot, things like that with a player like Makai Lemon, because it's unfortunately for the NFL. The NFL doesn't have too many slot only or majority of slot players that go out there and become true studs. In fact, there's only one in the NFL this year, one player in the NFL this year that's in the top 24 of fantasy wide receivers who is above a 70% slot rate. Well, guess where Makai Lemon is for the year? 70.1% of his routes come from the slot. That is very high. It's a lot higher than what you would want to see from a guy that you think could be inside outside, a la Malik Neighbors, who in his junior season, Malik Neighbors was at a let's see, I have it right here.
He was like 50-50. Like
53.6% in the slot. So, still in the slot quite a bit, but I mean, like Andy just said, closer to 50-50 rather than 70-30. So that is a pretty big difference. But 59.1% of Makai Lemon's receptions this season have come within 9 yards of the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage. 60% of his targets or his receptions have come within 9 yards of the line of scrimmage. His average ADOT on those plays, because obviously it's less than 9, but that doesn't mean it's always 9 or always 8 or whatever. His average ADOT on those plays is 3.45 yards for an ADOT. Obviously, some of those are behind the line of scrimmage. Some of them are, closer to 8 or 9 or whatever. But that's the average ADOT, 3.45 yards. 17% of his yardage on the season has come from passes behind the line of scrimmage. So we're seeing a lot of work. 17 is not terrible, and like you were saying, Luther Burden definitely had a higher percentage of those things in the past. So I feel like we're my goal here tonight is to show that he might not quite be as bad as Luther Burden, but he's definitely closer to Luther Burden than he is to Malik Neighbors and or Jordan Tyson.
He averages like a first down on all of those catches behind the line of scrimmage. If you dig deeper, so the guy's making plays. I mean, why wouldn't you keep throwing him the ball if he's getting you first down every time you hit him with one of those passes?
This is where it gets scary, though, and you were kind of attributing it to the quarterback, but I have to wonder if the wide receiver one for USC, has something to do with it, because you had said that the intermediate routes drop off for Maeva, and yet we don't see the deep routes dropping off for Maeva, and we don't see the deep routes dropping off for Lemon. So it doesn't necessarily seem to be an arm talent thing for Maeva. He can get the ball down there. Doesn't even necessarily seem to be an issue for Lemon getting down the field, because he has, I think it was 30% of his routes or something like that are deep, or 30% of his yardage are deep targets or deep routes. So he obviously has the ability to get down the field, but his immediate routes drop off so hard compared to the line of scrimmage or the short routes. He has only a 42.9% catch rate, and only 92 of his 735 yards, I think it is, 92 yards and 1 touchdown from the entire season come from intermediate routes. So I mean that just doesn't give me hope as far as like being an actual like true route runner, somebody that we would like to see earning real targets, running real routes. That kind of leads me to believe that he's more of a guy who is just running nines. You're either right around the line of scrimmage running running screens and things like that, maybe a little slant, or you're running like a 9 route for the deep, and if you're wide open, then you can go ahead and catch it. So losing that intermediate is really tough for me when I'm looking for a player that can play in all levels of the field, who could be a stud, a la Malik Neighbors, somebody to that effect. In fact, 49.3% of Malik Neighbors' receptions came from the intermediate and deep routes, with a 58.8% catch rate on the intermediate routes. So, you're looking at almost a 20% better catch rate, and that accounted for 27.5% of his yardage on the season. So we saw so much more in the intermediate levels of the field for Neighbors. he did have some shorter yardage things. But he was also he was very prevalent in the intermediate, and then he was also there for the deep, showing he could do it at all levels of the field. I don't think we can say the same for Lemon, that he can do it at all levels of the field. I think we can say he can definitely do it at the short levels, and he can and be the yak monster or whatever when he's getting a 3 yard A dot, and we can see some plays, bigger plays, for the deep routes, but we're not seeing anything in between.
Yeah. I think it does have to do with the quarterback a little bit, because those intermediate routes are more technical than the deep routes. You know, if it's 20 yards down the field, you're basically just trying to get it on top of the safety, and Maeva, who's got a strong arm, just throws it up and over, and his completion percentage actually increases on those deep routes. Granted, it's like 58%, but that's about what you'd expect on any deep route from most quarterbacks. But having like Jaden Daniels, we talked about with Malik Neighbors, his intermediary completion percentage was like 65%, and Maeva's is 50%. And I know 15% doesn't sound like a lot, but just based on the target share that Lemon's getting right now, across an entire season, if your quarterback's throwing 65% versus 50%, that's another 100 yards on your season total, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a difference between 1,200 yard season and a 1,300 yard season, which can make a big difference.
Well, just to put a little caveat into that, Jacoby Lane's intermediate catch percentage is actually 55.6% on the season, compared to the 42, and I think we might have lost Andy again, or he was frozen for a second, compared to the 42.9% for Lemon. So I'm with you that obviously I don't think Maeva is Jaden Daniels. I'm completely with you on that one. But I do think that we even see other players on the same exact team have higher catch rates and higher totals. In fact, Jacoby Lane has less receptions and less things, but he actually has similar yardage in the intermediate level of the field as Lemon, even though he's caught less passes and things like that. So, you're just seeing better play by Lane in that level of the field. Even if we do kind of say, okay, Maeva is not Jaden Daniels.
All right. Yes, I missed it. So what was Jacoby Lane's stats for the intermediate?
55.6% reception rate or catch rate versus 42.9% for Lemon.
Yeah, Lemon does have a drop. If he doesn't, and I know that you said drops are quarterback stats, so I'm going to hold you to that. If he didn't have that drop,
Hey,
his catch rate would be 50%.
I have a bunch of data here that I can throw at you. I promise you, drop is never mentioned in any of these things. I really don't count that against wide receivers unless it's just egregious. If you're Deontay Johnson, then yeah, we can talk about some drops. But beyond that, I really don't ever mention the word drop when it comes to wide receivers.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's where it is. That's where I stand on all of this. I mean, yes, I know the Malik Neighbors thing was hyperbole. We had to throw something out there to garner some engagement. But I do think it's not fair to put him in the same bucket as Laviska Shenault and Luther Burden, which you had done. You were calling, what did you say, Laviska Lemon, Malik Burden, or Makai Burden.
Yep.
That's not right. I know you're just trying to stoke the flames a little bit, which is always fun, but let's be real here. And I even pulled out like the yards per team pass attempt and the market share. Those guys dropped off a table, and what happened when they dropped off a table is they stopped getting targeted behind the line of scrimmage. Like somebody must have told them, like a pro scout or something, like, hey, if you want to keep your first round draft capital, you're going to have to start running some actual routes. And when they did that, it didn't work out for them. So, maybe that's maybe it's true for Makai Lemon too, but this is his third season. Everything's pointing up. Maybe if he stayed another year and somebody told him the same thing, like, hey, we need to see more of the intermediate stuff, more of the deeper stuff, and then it turns out that he couldn't do it, then it would be that same story all over again. But at this point, and even his ADOT compared to those guys, and I know 2 yards doesn't sound like a big deal, but he's at about 10 right now. Let's say, just for posterity's sake, let's round it to 10.
Sure.
Luther Burden and Laviska Shenault, I think their career ADOTs are around like 8, maybe even less than 8. And Luther Burden had a season where it was like 1 or 3 or something crazy. So I don't think that it's fair to put them in the same spot. I think those guys too play different. Like they play big. And like I said, Makai Lemon is not a big guy. He's not even 200 pounds, whereas both of those guys were just like either had a really high BMI or were just really big guys who caught the ball and bullied people at the line of scrimmage, which is not what Makai Lemon does.
All right, so I didn't know exactly how much you were going to fight me on all these numbers and on everything. So I have so much that I can go to here. But you started talking about the ADOT, and I want to bring that up here because this is getting away from the comparisons for a minute. I'm not trying to compare to Malik Neighbors. I'm not trying to compare to Luther Burden. I'm just talking about Makai Lemon, the player, for this second. And this is where I was telling you earlier that my goal was to kind of get you to understand, or at least have the listeners understand that maybe Makai Lemon's a little overrated. Maybe the numbers are a little juiced up. And so it's a little concerning when you start breaking it down, at least in my opinion. For the first thing, there's 130 college FBS football teams. Is that correct?
I have no idea. It sounds right.
I
It's
think
around there.
I think it's 130.
Yeah.
Guess who has the most passing yards per game out of every one of those teams? It's USC.
Right
I'm
now?
not gonna.
All
Yeah,
right, I was gonna
it's
say
it's
probably
USC. It's USC. Out of all of the teams that I track, at least FBS teams, not FCS, not anything crazy like that. Of all the teams that I track, that I look at, USC has the most passing yards per game. So right there, maybe you start questioning, like, are we falling into a production trap, or where are we falling into a volume trap where we're getting excited because this player is standing out production wise in a year where not a lot of wide receivers are we seeing a guy who's putting up some decent yardage totals and then going, oh, yep, he goes to wide receiver too. But beyond that, if we look at their season, and a lot of people talk about when talking about Jaden Maeva, how easy their schedule has been. I don't ever hear that being talked about when people talk about Makai Lemon, and I think it's because they don't really want to like Maeva, but they want to love Lemon. But his ADOT is really being buoyed. Wow, buoyed. I was trying to read it for some reason, and I forgot how English for a second. His ADOT is being buoyed by the easy schedule earlier in the season. He had an ADOT of 11.8 against Missouri State, 12.0 against Georgia Southern, and then 12.7 against Illinois. But in that game with Illinois, they had lost, I believe it was 6 DBs the week prior, and I'm not 100% sure who came back and who wasn't, but I can almost guarantee you that 6 DBs that missed the game prior did not all return and things like that. So I would say, and we've seen Illinois not be the defense that we've expected in the past, or even the team that we've expected in the past. So those 3 games are really skyrocketing his ADOT. So you're talking about this ADOT of, oh, we're going to go ahead and bump it up to 10, except for we're already bumping it up because of Georgia Southern and Missouri State. Against Purdue, he had a 6.0 ADOT. Against Michigan, he had a 6.0 ADOT. And against Notre Dame, he had an 8.6 ADOT. That is scary. So, I mean, they don't tell me like that doesn't scare the crap out of you. Against any of the good teams, his ADOT just plummets. Against the crappy teams, it skyrockets. And by skyrockets, I mean it goes to a normal level or something like that. Now, look at his 2 biggest games against Georgia Southern and against Illinois. Once again, as far as I know, they were missing a bunch of their DBs. Those 2 games account for 40.7%, almost 41% of his receiving yards on the season. and 4 of his 6 touchdowns, 2/3 of his touchdowns on the season came from those 2 games. So 40% of the receiving yards, 2/3 of his touchdown. His biggest play of the season, a 74-yard touchdown, came against Georgia Southern. That's 10% of his receiving yardage on the season came from that one play against Georgia Southern, and 24.5% of his deep route yardage came from that one play against Georgia Southern. So he has only been over 100 receiving yards in 3 games this season out of 7. And I can tell you 2 of them were against Illinois with no DBs and against Georgia Southern. So I just think when we start looking and breaking down this season, it really has to scare you. Oh, and the other one was Michigan State, which, I mean, honestly, I have no idea if Michigan State's good or bad or whatever as far as defense. I would assume they're pretty bad, but I really don't know, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, they're real bad.
But it just you start looking at those numbers, you start looking at those things, and you can't tell me that doesn't at least scare you a little bit.
I wouldn't say I'm scared because we always look at the season as a whole, and yeah, okay, if you're gonna draw the line at 100 yards, that's fine. But he also had a 90-yard game and a 93-yard game and a 76-yard game. So, these games happen. Jordan Tyson has games like that too. It's he's still getting a lot of receptions. I think in the Notre Dame game, I think it was more of a scheme thing because he played a lot more in the slot than he has been the entire season. But in the Michigan game, like Michigan's just a stingy defense. Like you're going to get into a bit of a dogfight with that program, even though USC kind of controlled that game. And I think that was kind of the reason why they didn't, throw the ball down the field because they were having so much success with King Miller on the ground that they didn't even have to throw the ball. So, for that, I mean, we could go back and forth and talk about like, what about this game? What about that game? And we each have excuses and reasoning for all of them. But that's why we try to take a step back and look at the season as a whole. Right now, I'm really not concerned. I just feel like the 14 targets behind the line of scrimmage are certainly limiting his ADOT right now. The intermediary throws are a bit of a concern. I'm going to write it off at this point, just based on the upward trajectory of what we've been seeing every year from this guy. And maybe that's a mistake. It seems like at this point he's going to be a first-round pick in this draft, which, seems logical given what other receivers are available. You've got Jordan Tyson and everyone else, it seems like. So, and it seems like he's going to be a later first round pick too, which is always good because that generally means you're going to be on a better team. But I don't really have much that I'm too concerned about at this point in time. Yes, I would like to see more routes down the field, more catches in that 10 to 20 yard range. But at the same time, if he continues doing what he's doing, I'm not gonna be too worried about it because it's working for him. And if it's working for him, then a team's gonna see what he's capable of and draft him to do what he's doing right now in the NFL.
Yeah, and the only reason why I was mentioning the 100 yards receiving was because, once again, if you really pushed on the Malik Neighbors comparison, I was going to say Malik Neighbors was only under 100 yards receiving in 3 of his 12 games in his junior season. So, we're seeing he's already there in 4, or he's already under 100 yards in 4 of his 7 games so far. So I would imagine that number continues at least at that rate. But you're not pushing up back on the Neighbors stuff, so I'm not going to continue with the Neighbors thing. I'm going to move on to Luther Burden here, and I know you've already kind of said you don't think he's as bad as Luther Burden. You think he's better than Luther Burden, but you don't you also don't think he's Malik Neighbors, somewhere in between. But I want to show that the numbers actually do match up a lot better with Luther Burden than even other players ahead of Lemon. And You were actually a little off because you had said that the A dot for Burden was a little bit lower than it actually was. It was actually 9.0 in his best season, whereas it's 9.8 in Lemon's best season. So A dot not that far off from each other. 3.384 yards per team pass attempt for Lemon in his best season, 3.124 for Burden. So not too far off. A 33% market share in Lemon's best season, 35% in Burden's. So Burden actually gets the edge there. 108 yards per game for Lemon in his best season, obviously this one, and then 93 yards per game for Burden. So Lemon takes that side, but then the biggest difference, I guess you would say, is a 70.1% slot rate for Lemon and 85.1% slot rate for Burden. So it's definitely even higher, which is one of the reasons why we've always been out on Burden. It was like, 70% slot rate is really difficult to fall in love with for NFL purposes. And 85.1% rate is almost like a death knell. It's just it's not gonna happen for most players. But then I wrote in here just so I wouldn't forget if I started getting heated or anything. I said, honestly, I think that Lemon is better than Luther Burden. I don't want to hate on him that much. Lemon has a higher PPR points per touch. Didn't completely fall apart as a junior. Has a higher yards per reception and more. But the truth is, his numbers are so much closer to Burden's than to a guy like Malik Neighbors. That doesn't mean that Lemon is terrible. Just that he's not a top tier wide receiver and shouldn't ever be mentioned with the likes of Malik Neighbors and Jordan Tyson. And you kind of ruined it for me because I thought I had a nuke for you right at the end of all of our arguments here. I thought you were going to be going back and forth and you were just going to be like, look at this number for Neighbors, look at this number for Lemon, and blah blah blah. And then I was going to say, but you already kind of ruined it at the beginning, even though you kind of glanced over it. And I was gonna say, yeah, but Malik Neighbors was doing all that stuff with BTJ on the other side of the ball, and I know you already touched on that, but I do think that's one big thing that if you're just looking at a chart from CampusCanton.com that gets kind of lost in the sauce there. Yeah, he could be similar in numbers. He could be similar in a certain metric or something to that effect, but I don't think we can actually compare those things.
Yeah, no, and like I said, the Malik Neighbors thing, I saw the chart and I was like, oh, this will be a good tweet. But also, I do think that he's closer to Malik Neighbors than he is to Luther Burden, based on the trajectory of where he's going. Whereas Luther Burden leveled off and even dipped as his career progressed. Also, I'm seeing on PFF that his best season for ADOT was, I guess it was 9.1, but that was his terrible junior season. So that was when he tried to put something together and it clearly didn't work. His actual good season, it was 8.7, but regardless, it's always been around 9. Makai Lemon, it seems like it's always going to be around 10. So it's tough,
As long as he plays Georgia Southern and Missouri State and all
those. There's a lot more games left this year.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, honest, and all kidding aside, but I mean, the reason why I wanted to point that stuff out is we would assume that their schedule going forward. I mean, you might know their schedule better than I do, but we would assume that the Big Ten schedule going forward is more conference play, more difficult matchups than Georgia Southerns and Missouri States and things like that. So if he continues on at his Big Ten rate, his ADOT's just going to keep going down. You're sitting here talking about almost a 10 ADOT, but I mean, if he plays 5 more games at a close to 6 ADOT or somewhere between 6 and 8.6 ADOT, which is his basically P4 matchups that he's played, that's basically where he's been. So if we assume somewhere around there like 7 or something like that, then he's really looking at closer to 8, maybe 9 as a goal by the end of the season. And then now I think you're starting to get a little more concerned.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case because I will tell you the schedule. I had to look it up. I don't know USC's schedule off the top of my head, but The Big Ten, for one, is I think a little bit overrated this year. Obviously, Ohio State is arguably the best team in the country. Um, Indiana's having a really great season. Oregon, they're always in the mix. You can never write them out. Michigan, I feel like they're kind of in this rebuilding process. They've got Bryce Underwood. They're kind of stringing him along. So, but the rest of their season kind of softens up. They do get Oregon. They have to go on the road, and that's at the end of November. Not the last week in November, because their final game they play UCLA in that rivalry game, and we all know what UCLA they kind of had that stretch where everyone was playing fired up after the coach got fired, and then they just got dog walked by Indiana last week. So the other teams are playing are Nebraska, Northwestern, and Iowa. I don't think anyone's too fearful of any of those opponents. I do think there are going to be games where we see him run more downfield routes. He's going to make those catches still. We're still going to see the screens because, like I said, if he's getting 10 yards a catch when they're throwing him the ball 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, then why would they stop doing that? It's working out for them, but I think we'll still see, kind of a mirror of what he's already put down as far as statistics and what we were talking about with like the passing depths and all that stuff. So I don't think anything's going to change really, but I do think it's going to he finished with 10-yard 8 out last year. I think it's going to be similar this year, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And it's hard to put him in the bucket of like a Luther Burden or a Laviska Shenault because, like I said, these are these big guys that are like everyone is excited about him because they're just beating people up at the line of scrimmage and breaking tackle, and like that's not exactly what Makai Lemon is. He's 195 pounds, 5'11". Like he's more shifty than that. Like that's not how he plays his game. So I don't want to put them in the same bucket because they're different players entirely. He's obviously a good kick returner. He showed that off last season. They're not really using him in that capacity this year. But that's what he does. He's an elusive player. So he's not like a super good athlete either. I don't really keep track of the athletic metrics and stuff, but every now and then I'll pull up Campus to Canton's athletic comparison tool. And I did do it with Makai Lemon, and it looked like his speed score was like in the 70th percentile. So it's like, kind of average essentially. I know 50th percentile would be average, but to me, like 70s, he's getting like a C minus in the speed score, which isn't anything great. So he's not like a super athlete, but whatever he's doing is working. He seems to be breaking tackles, and he's got the elusiveness after the catch, to where even with the frame that he has, he's getting 8 yards after the catch, which I think that's exciting. Like I said, I think that's the question mark though. Obviously, with his profile, is can he do those intermediate routes? Is it a Jaden Maeva thing? We're gonna have to find. These are the things that we're gonna find out once they matriculate to the NFL. But as it stands right now, I feel good about him being a first-round draft pick. Worst case scenario, a second-round draft pick. I feel good about him probably being in a good situation, and he's going to get opportunities early. So at this point, 102, and maybe this is just because the draft class is what it is. You could probably make arguments for Jeremiah Love at that spot, and I certainly would not argue with you there because Jeremiah Love is a great running back prospect. If you want to take him at 102, I wouldn't put up even a singular word of arguments there. But beyond that, like who else are you going to take? For me, it's Makai Lemon. I John's probably got a couple guys that he would take before him based on what we've heard so far, but the arrow's pointing up. Whereas with those other guys that we mentioned who are similar behind the line of scrimmage type players, even though they're built differently physically, the arrow started pointing down as their careers in college continued on, whereas that's not happening for Makai Lemon.
All very fair. Getting away from the neighbor's comp, who would you try to comp him to that's already in the NFL? Would you say like a Laviska Shenault, like maybe a Luther Burden, somebody like no?
Are
No,
those guys still
seriously
in the
though,
NFL?
like seriously though, like is there anyone that you
I
actually would try
tried.
to comp him to?
I tried before this show to come up with somebody, and like the the same thing except on the opposite of the spectrum. I mentioned Josh Downs earlier, but he's not really the same either. Like he's much more slight. He's a 5'7" guy, 170 pounds. Like Makai Lemon is built like the type of wide receiver ones we're seeing today. This 6 foot, 200 pound type guy. So it was really difficult for me to maybe find a comp. I haven't really looked at like Jackson Smith and Jigba as far as
He's not.
like that
He's
comp,
not
but
JSN.
well, I know he's
I mean,
not.
so
But
so I said there's one player who's above 70% slot rate in the NFL right now who's in the top 24. It's
is that
JSN.
Jason? Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that would probably be his ceiling comp for me at this
but
point.
yeah, I think we can all agree he's also not JSN.
Yeah, I mean, and JSN had such a weird college career too that it's hard to put into, you know, comp JSN to anybody because he had such an insane
Yeah,
freshman sophomore year, and then the injuries, or was it the fresh? It was either freshman or sophomore year, but then injuries and sitting out, and so it's hard to really comp JSN to anybody if you're just going by the numbers, but.
yeah, it was 1,606 yards as a sophomore, as a true
Yeah,
sophomore though.
and then he just basically did not play his entire junior season.
Yeah, essentially didn't play as a junior, but I mean, like, holy crap! I mean, that's the thing,
Yeah,
and once again, I know you're not, but like that's where we start getting into the JSNs, the Malik Neighbors, things like that. Like, there, some of the stuff might. I think when you're looking at the metrics, some of the metrics might not look that crazy different. You know, like Malik Neighbors' target share or market share in his best season was 36%. But that's what makes the difference between an elite player and a non-elite player. You know, like those are the things. 3% on top of an already good player is what makes an elite player. So you're looking at 33% instead of 36% instead of 33%. You're looking at 1,606 yards as a true sophomore compared to 700 yards or 750 as a true sophomore for Lemon. Like things like that. It's just like, like that's where it gets really difficult. And I mean, the JSN thing, people always wanted to say that he was going to be slot only, and I guess technically they're right, but it's like it's one of those weird situations where it actually kind of works, and I guess he can kind of do a little bit of everything, and so it doesn't really matter. And I don't know that we can actually say that with Lemon. I hate that I'm even saying this because I actually love the player, but I think that Makai Lemon is Jaden Reed light. I that's how I would kind of comp him to, at least the way that the Packers are using Reed, where he's essentially a slot only. He only plays like 60-70% of the snaps on offense because he comes off the field when they're in two wide receiver sets and things like that. That's what I would kind of foresee with Lemon, although I believe that Reed is a better player than Lemon. So I hate it because I really do like Reed, and especially the way he started the season before he got hurt and everything. I had high hopes for Reed, especially this season. So I hate that I'm even comping the players, but I feel like that's kind of like his ceiling. Whereas obviously we would be comparing him to a possible JSN, Malik Neighbors, or whoever else. I don't think those ceilings are realistic. But a Jaden Reed, like top 24 season kind of guy, yeah, I could see that happening.
yeah. Jaden Reed's interesting because he started his career at Western, and then even his first year at Michigan State as like a primary slot guy. But then he didn't really break out until they moved him out. And then obviously now in the NFL, he's turning into this gadget type slot, jet sweep type player. So maybe they're built similarly. For me, I'm thinking like maybe it is Josh Downs as the comp, but a little bit bigger and hopefully more durable. Like if Josh Downs never got hurt, um,
Yeah.
which would
Well, that's
which
the
would be
thing is
great.
I feel like Josh Downs doesn't get used properly because I think that Josh Downs could literally play inside or outside. I don't know that we can say that about Lemon. But the thing is that Downs gets hurt way too often, and so it doesn't even truly matter because as much as I love the player, sorry, like once you're hurt like every third game, it's really tough to be like, oh yeah, that guy's a stud, you know?
Yeah, I mean that guy's questionable every other week.
Yeah, I that trust me, it hurts. I have a lot of Josh Downs, and that one hurts. But I feel like the difference is that like I was able to get a Josh Downs, late in the first round. I was able to get a Jaden Reed, either late in the first round, early in the second round. I don't remember now. Where did I draft Jaden Reed?
Reed probably went late, like second or probably late second, I would
I
think.
think he was. Yeah, I
Well,
think he
no,
was in
because
the
he's a
second.
Packer, and I feel like Packers always get drafted early too, because there's just that group of people. I'm one of them. Those Packer fans that just think that their passing offense is untouchable. So they're like, oh, we got to get this guy. He's gonna be a new wide receiver one.
Right. Man, I'm trying to remember where the hell I drafted him. And you're actually, you're right for. Or no, that was the 21. That was the 22 season. I just wanted to check on the slot percentage. Yeah, they did move Reed out of the slot at in college at Michigan State. He was only slot 15.9% in college, but we know that he plays a slot at Green Bay. So that's what's kind of confusing me there. Is
Yeah.
he's I mean they're definitely using more of that gadgety slot kind of player in the NFL, but man, that's really pissed me. I got to go back and look at where I drafted my Jaden Reeds. I want to say it was in the second round though. I don't think he was even a first round pick. But that's the whole point. Is I think even if it was a late first round, it doesn't matter. The point of the story is that you're talking about Makai Lemon at 102, and I know you cannot compare class to class because obviously every class is different. It depends how many QBs you have. It depends how many running backs you have. All that kind of stuff. Um, but I feel so much better about taking Jaden Reed at like 202 than I do about taking Makai Lemon at 102. And I guess that's my whole point of this entire grudge match here is that, and you were worried about making an hour. We are over the hour mark, sir. So don't ever worry about that when you're dealing with John. Yeah, I can talk, baby. But yeah, so I'm not. I'm not comfortable picking him at 102. I have two wide receivers beyond Jordan Tyson that are ahead of him in this class. One of them, I guess, is technically iffy for if he comes out or not. So I can't really say if I can guarantee that. But I'm thinking more 107, 108, something around that range. That's when I'd start feeling more comfortable with the Makai Lemon.
So who do you got? You got Carnell Tate ahead of him, and you've got
Jace,
who
baby.
else? Oh, okay, all right. You know, I like Jace Brown too, but obviously it doesn't seem like he's ever gonna pick up enough steam to get into that early half of the first round, which is fine for me. You know, I prefer it that way because I always love drafting the best players in the second round.
Right. He's not a guarantee to come out. In fact, a lot of people would even probably go as far to say that he won't come out. I think he should. I think it's a pretty down class for a lot of positions. Maybe not necessarily for a wide receiver, like as far as like a down class, but it's not necessarily like some studly class either for wide receivers. So I think he should come out. I think he'd be a solid addition to the class, and I'd be willing to take him over Lemon at this point. But I think that is enough of that. An hour of arguing about Makai Lemon. Is he good? Is he bad? The one thing we do know after all of this talk is he is not Malik Neighbors. We know that for sure. Andy, do you want to apologize now for bringing on this grudge match, or do you want to wait for the listeners to tell me how right I was all along, like they did with the Malik Willis, like they did with the Isaiah Spiller?
Well, first of all, I feel bad for those guys who felt so strongly about Malik Willis and Isaiah Spiller to go on and defend them. Isaiah Spiller, it was before that I really got into the advanced metrics and stats following. I was just sort of listening to other people at that point in time. So, I can't say that I had a strong opinion on him one way or another because, I don't really know. Malik Willis, on the other hand, I always kind of knew that something was not going to work out there. Just when you start seeing the quarterback one at Liberty being mocked at 101, I was like, is that really what NFL teams are going to do? And clearly it wasn't. But I will say he's won a few good games for my Packers. So all the respect in the world to Malik Willis, the best QB2 in the NFL right now. But no, I think this is a good discussion. I look forward to being somewhat right. I think we've kind of both buffered ourselves in a way. You're like, well, he's tier 2, so he could still hit at 73%, which is really good. Like a 73% hit rate's fantastic. So if he does hit, you can be like, well, I had him in tier 2. That's not out of the realm of possibilities.
Right.
But
and not to cut you off, but to cut you off, I think that's the whole point is like he's a 73% hit rate player that people are trying to push above a 93% hit rate player, and so that's where I'm like, whoa, let's pump the brakes. I don't even care. Once again, you call him your wide receiver 2, we're gravy, baby. Like I don't really care about that. It's when you start pushing him above tier 1 players, tier 0 players, like things like that. And I'm always going to say, we don't break tiers here. That's one of the important lessons that I've learned over the years is like, we just don't break tiers for a reason because like there's a reason why the analytics will show you, the numbers will show you that this guy has a 93% hit rate and this guy doesn't, and so of course you can always go, oh yeah, but Puka Nakua or something like that. Yeah, sure. But I'm talking about over the course of 10 years, who's going to have the better hit rates, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough, because the way this draft class is falling right now, it just doesn't feel like there's much beyond the Jordan Tysons and Jeremiah Loves of the world. So, unfortunately, it seems like we're going to have to start drafting those tier 2 guys earlier in the first round than we're used to. But I hope that he does turn into Malik Neighbors just so I can go back to that tweet time and time again and retweet it and be like, remember when John didn't think he was Malik Neighbors? Well, now look.
Right. And remember when I called him Neighbors Jr.?
Yeah, that's going to be great. Actually, I'm going to gain a ton of followers from that tweet if that's the case.
Yeah, you'll be the next D-bro. Actually, I lied. I have one other wide receiver ahead of Makai Lemon in the class. At this point, I do have to question if he actually comes out, though. I think he might stay another year, and that's Eric Singleton Jr. So I feel like just the way that season has gone with Jackson Arnold and everything, that as much as I love the player, as much as I know that he is a stud in my heart of hearts, I don't know if he can truly come out with what they've done on the field, with what he's had to deal with, and then on top of that, having to deal with the teammate that he's had to deal with. Once again, I think that he should. I feel like I would love him. I would draft the hell out of him if he did, but it is getting more and more difficult to actually assume that he's actually coming out. So that it's kind of tough because I technically Lemon could be my wide receiver 5 when it's all said and done, or he could be my wide receiver 3, depending on who comes out and who doesn't.
You're a hypocrite. You want to talk about ADOT? Look at Singleton's Missouri game. He had a negative ADOT on 8 targets.
I'm going to say this once. I'm going to say it again. Jackson Arnold.
Okay. But Jaden Maeva's not the problem for Makai.
Well, you say that, but at the same time, Singleton Jr., I can go back to something I said in my DLF ranks from the offseason. I actually still have the note on there, and it says Eric Singleton Jr. is easily a top 3 wide receiver in this draft class. And he is. But yet he's dropped that far because he's actually He's actually one spot ahead of Makai Lemon, essentially very close to being tied to Makai Lemon, and it's just because of the drop from this year. Like every number's gone down, PPR points per touch, A dot, yards per reception. Every single number's gone down this year, and so like while obviously I look for some of the stats to come from best seasons, some of them to come from all the seasons. He's not going to completely fall off the face of the planet, but when you start having a worse season basically all around, it does have to drop you somewhat. So, I still love Singleton to death. I think he's a better receiver than Makai Lemon. I think he's dealing with a much worse quarterback play, but I can't say that he hasn't dropped either.
I'm going to set a reminder on my phone for 1 year from today, and we will revisit what Makai Lemon is doing, hopefully in the NFL, and then we can decide who was right and who was wrong.
The best part's going to be when Lemon decides to stay for his senior year, and then none of this freaking matters. And then we have to have another grudge match next year when he's sitting at like 9.94 A dot, and like three of them came from against Georgia Southern, and
We'll do it. We'll fire it up again.
we will, but we'd love to hear from the listeners. Who are you siding with on this grudge match? And do you have a comp? Do you have a comp for Makai Lemon? Because if we're struggling, then I would assume that everyone's kind of struggling to come up with a comp, and that might not be a good thing. So tell us all about Makai Lemon, and what you think about him and all that kind of stuff. Andy, I appreciate you coming on to this grudge match. Even though you were a little scared and showed up late, and acted like you didn't have the link at first and all that kind of stuff, but you did finally show up. So I do truly appreciate that. Appreciate the listeners for listening for over an hour now, because that's what we do. We hope that Aaron will be back. Damn A names. We hope that Aaron will be back next week. So that he can bring us back down to earth, and maybe he can give us his opinion, or maybe he has a comp for us. We'll have to wait and see. But until then, we're going to go ahead and cash out. We will see you guys later.